What if the evolution of the human brain wasn't an upgrade, but a trade-off that cost us our connection to reality? Not as a metaphor, not as spirituality, as a literal, measurable possibility that researchers in neuroscience, cognitive anthropology, and biofield science are taking seriously. Because here's what the evidence is starting to suggest. The brain you have right now, the one that reads, plans, worries, scrolls, may be less connected to the actual world around you than the brain your ancestor had 50,000 years ago. Not less intelligent, not less capable, less connected, less present, receiving less of what's actually there. We built civilization, and we made a trade. We got abstraction, language, technology. And we gave up something that doesn't have a clean name in modern science yet, but that every ancient culture has always had a name for. We gave up our connection to the field. Today, we're going into the science of exactly what that means. What we lost, why we lost it, and what's building to suggest it was never gone, just buried. Your brain is receiving approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind processes roughly 50. The rest is filtered out before it reaches your awareness. This filtering system is not fixed. It responds to the environment it's trained in determining not just what you notice, but what you're capable of noticing. The modern environment is the noisiest in human history, informationally as much as acoustically. The average person today encounters more information in a single day than a 15th century person encountered in a lifetime, all competing for the same 50 bitses. What does a nervous system do when overwhelmed with signal? It narrows its filter, cuts more aggressively, and over time, over years of living in that noise, the filter hardens. What it cuts becomes genuinely imperceptible. Now picture the inverse, a nervous system trained in almost none of that, no screens, no artificial light. Just the living world wind direction, light through leaves, the subtle behavioral shifts in animals signaling weather, predators, or water underground. The brain devotes resources to what it uses, engage a sense with high stakes, and the architecture expands. Louis Liebenberg, studying tracking cognition in Botswana, found that expert trackers process visual, auditory, olfactory, and proprioceptive input simultaneously in ways most modern humans cannot access, not because the hardware isn't there, but because it has never been trained. The ancient nervous system wasn't picking up a different signal, it was running a wider receiver. The HeartMath Institute has spent decades studying the electromagnetic field generated by the human heart. What they found, the heart produces a field measurable several feet outside the body, larger and stronger than the brain's, and it's not static. It changes in response to emotional states, environmental inputs, and the proximity of other living organisms. In controlled studies, individuals in a calm, coherent state, what HeartMath calls heart coherence, show measurable synchronization with the electromagnetic rhythms of the Earth itself. The Schumann resonances, electromagnetic frequencies generated by the Earth's own atmospheric activity, overlap almost exactly with the frequencies of the human heart in coherent states. The frequency of a calm human heart overlaps with the frequency of the living Earth. Ancient peoples across every continent described this as something they could feel and navigate by, a living field, a web of connection that a sufficiently quiet human could perceive and communicate through. We called it superstition. Now we have instruments to measure it. This brings us to the theory mainstream science handles carefully but refuses to dismiss, that early humans, tuned to this field, may have shared information without language. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake has spent 4 decades testing his theory of morphic resonance, the hypothesis that a field of information is shared between members of a species, carrying behavioral and experiential memory, independent of genetics or direct communication. His most replicated experiments involve people sensing when they're being stared at from behind. It sounds trivial until you look at the data. Across tens of thousands of controlled trials, the hit rate is consistently above chance, reproducibly, in ways standard sensory explanations don't account for. Sheldrake's hypothesis remains controversial. If these effects are detectable in modern humans, people with nervous systems chronically narrowed by noise and abstraction, what would those same capacities have looked like in a human whose attentional system was trained, from birth, on the living field around them? To sit in a forest at dusk with a nervous system calibrated to receive everything the environment was broadcasting? To feel the Earth's electromagnetic coherence syncing with your heartbeat? To sense the attention of another mind before they spoke? We call that a spiritual experience now. We treat it as rare, something cultivated through years of practice. Your ancestor called it Tuesday. At the intersection of full challenge and full skill, the baseline for early humans, the prefrontal cortex, deactivates, and reality feels more real than normal. The self-boundary becomes permeable. The heart syncs with the Earth's field. In that state, what becomes possible? The cave paintings are the clearest evidence of what that felt like. Deep in the most inaccessible chambers of Lascaux and Chauvet, reachable only through crawling passages, ancient humans painted with extraordinary precision. These weren't decorative, they were ritual. Made in altered states, by firelight, in chambers where the acoustics resonate so specifically that the paintings cluster exactly where the sound is strongest. They went into the deepest part of the earth and painted what they saw when their perception was fully open. That is not primitive behavior. That is a technology of consciousness. Michael Pollan documents what psychedelic therapy subjects consistently describe: a sense that the world is more real than ordinary experience, colors beyond normal saturation, connection to every living thing in proximity, information arriving from beyond the individual mind, and an overwhelming certainty, often the most certain feeling the subject has ever had, that the separation between self and world is not a truth, it is a construction. Researchers now call this not an altered state, but an unaltered one, a return to a mode of perception that modern life has trained out of us. Your ancestors didn't need the pharmacology, they lived in a world that hadn't yet learned to close itself off. The early human brain was not less capable than ours, it was differently calibrated, wider filters, quieter signal. Tuned to a living field, we now have instruments to detect, but have largely lost the nervous system architecture to feel. What ancient cultures called earth connection, spirit communication, or the voice of the land may have been measurable all along. Information transfer through electromagnetic and morphic fields that a sufficiently quiet nervous system could access in ways our noise-saturated minds cannot. We didn't lose this because we became smarter. We lost it because we built a world that made it unnecessary. But the field hasn't gone anywhere. The Schumann resonances are still pulsing. The heart is still broadcasting. The morphic layer, if Sheldrake is right, is still carrying its signal. Every meditation study, every flow research paper, every indigenous tradition, and every person who has sat in genuine silence in a living landscape long enough, they all report the same thing. Remove the noise, and something comes through. The nervous system recalibrates faster than you'd expect. The filter loosens, the boundary between self and world gets thinner. Your ancestors weren't living in a different world. They were living in this one, with direct access to everything it was saying. You still have that receiver. It was never removed, only buried. The question is whether you're willing to get quiet enough to hear what's still broadcasting.